I am going to be talking about alchemy, the cube, the original child, and the fake Jesus. Survivors of ritual abuse mind control have really complex internal structures and worlds. When the mind's shattered through trauma, it's a chaotic mess. The fragmented parts of self are then reordered by the programmer. They're given a domain where they're to operate. The parts are assigned unique functions within the survivor's internal system, and then they're tethered to specific entities that help them perform their jobs. The different domains in their system are assigned geometric shapes. The programmer has the child internalize these geometric shapes, and they become a scaffolding of sorts to build and organize the survivor's parts and form an operating system within them. So the programmer shatters and destroys the mind of the child and then reorders it in a way that they can be controlled. This is a picture of the Kabbalah tree. All survivors have this structure inside of them. For now, I just want you to notice the geometric shapes on it. The circles on the tree are called sephirot, and each of those circles represent a fragmented part of a survivor. Those circles represent the assigned domain of early splits called gems, and the job of the gems is to power the survivor system. Note the hexagram is a structure that sits at the top of the tree. And then there's a pentagram sitting at the bottom of the Kabbalah tree. These geometric shapes also represent complex systems within the survivor, and they serve as domains for parts. I said that the various shapes have a specific function. The center of that pentagram functions as a portal. Very strong emotional energy is used to pierce the veil and transport a person into the spirit realm. It's the job of the parts assigned to the pentagram domain to produce emotional energy for other parts to astral project to other realms. Here's another picture of a pentagram, and this one highlights the different elements and their associated color. So you can notice that air is yellow and earth is green and fire is red. Parts that were fragmented through electrocution, they have a near-death experience. So all the parts on that pentagram structure, each of the triangles will represent one of the elements, and the parts that reside on each of those triangles will have had a near-death experience that's related to the element. For example, there's a part we're going to talk about a little later that identifies and is made to believe it's a worm, and it will have been buried underneath the earth, and their near-death experience will have been asphyxiation. The blue water, children will have had near drowning in a bathtub. The parts that are on the yellow triangle will have had near-death experiences related to electrocution. So say that the parts that are on the air triangle, the element of air, the parts that were electrocuted get a code that there's from their programmer that they're supposed to relive that trauma, that near-death experience of electrocution. Those parts are going to begin reliving that. They're going to feel that emotion, and then they're going to push that energy into the next part of the system, which may be earth. And so then those parts that had the near death of burial, they're going to start reliving and being flooded with their near death experiences, and that produces more energy. And then they'll pass that energy to the next elemental. And so each of the points of that pentagram, the parts are cycling through and reliving and remembering their near-death experiences at the hands of their programmer. And that's going to produce tremendous energy that'll open up the center of that pentagram as a portal. So the center of that pentagram is when the parts that reside on that pentagram are reliving their near-death experiences and cycling it around and around. And it produces enough energy for another part to pierce the veil and travel to different domains. So using this Kabbalah tree example, I want us to look at what sacred geometry is. Sacred geometry attributes symbolism and sacred meaning to geometric shapes and their proportions. Most of the founding fathers of science and math principles that we learned about in school were members of secret societies. We learned about the science they did, but we weren't taught about the metaphysical components of their work. If it was just science they were doing, there would have been no need for secrecy. I personally believe they were laying the foundations for the work that secret societies and governments are now doing related to ritual abuse, mind control. The various secret societies worship knowledge, and that was the big blunder in the Garden of Eden. Man chose knowledge over God. Man chose to become his own God and seek knowledge about God's created universe rather than submit to God in personal relationship and live out their life the way God intended. This is the foundation of sacred geometry. It's a science of religion. It's a religion of science, I should say. It's worshiping the creation rather than the creator. These individuals study the design or the science of God's creation, and then they break individuals down into their basic components, pretending to be a god. They reorder it, they tamper with it, and they believe they're doing some big thing. And somehow this is supposed to make them like a god. I don't want to go into any depth regarding sacred geometry. I just want you to know that there's a science behind it, as well as religious and occult practices, and that different shapes have meaning. The shapes become an occult language. These geometric shapes are used in programming in many ways. In relation to programming, human beings are divided up into their very basic components, the elements, and they're used by fallen ones and men in power for very wicked purposes. These individuals are divided up on the level of matter. These human divides are assigned shapes to depict what components of humanity they contain. So why would somebody want to divide human life components up into their basic components on the level of matter? Human beings are broken down into their elemental components for the sake of performing alchemy. Alchemy, by definition, is breaking human beings down to their most basic components and then using that life force for magic. We're going to talk in more detail about what that looks like soon. It's used for warfare. Those elemental parts of a human being are bartered and traded. They're used for building in the spirit realm and a whole bunch of other things. It's very high level magic, alchemy is. But before we discuss alchemy in more detail, I want to show you a few more geometric shapes that are found within the internal world of a survivor. So the hexagram that we saw it at the top of the Kabbalah tree is another geometric shape that signifies a domain for parts to reside on where a specific job is done. Each of the parts that reside on the triangles of this hexagram are astrally projected and imprisoned on a specific planet. So each of the colored triangles on the 6 points of that hexagram not only represent a domain where parts reside, but these are parts that are quote unquote scattered to the cosmos and or astrally projected parts of their being to different planets. So the hexagram represents the macrocosm or the cosmos where parts are sent. Where we saw earlier, the pentagram is the microcosm, which is the elemental parts of a human being, of man, broken up into those different elements, air, earth, and water, etc. So just know that the black point of that star is associated with the entity Saturn and the domain of Saturn. Blue is Jupiter. Red is Mars. The green triangle's Venus. The orange one is Mercury. and the purple is moon. And the honeycomb hexagram in the center of that pentagram, hexagram shape is another portal. And that circle with the point in it represents piercing the veil. It represents the sun. So again, just another shape that I wanted to show you. It has a function, it has parts, and it's tethered to fallen entities. This picture of the philosopher's stone symbolizes all the components needed for alchemy. Note the geometric shapes. This is the central symbol for alchemy. You've probably seen it in Harry Potter movies, and it's a witchcraft symbol. It's also called the Great Work, also known as the magnum opus. Alchemists say this symbolizes one reaching spiritual perfection or enlightenment. They call it realizing one's true divine nature. We're going to see later when we talk about how parts of the child are set up to be a god in the spirit realm and do alchemy. It's about the human being setting themselves up as little g God and using these elemental parts of human beings to create. Each geometric shape in the philosopher's stone represents a part of a human being that's broken down into its elemental parts and used as building blocks to recreate and reorder them into something new. So I want to give you a quick overview of what alchemy looks like in action. This is from my notes. A client was sharing with me when we got to the parts inside that do alchemy. This is her account of what that looks like. Know that if you're new in the deprogramming process, the back parts of your system doing alchemy in this witchcraft have strong dissociative walls, and you're not going to see this part of your system. It's in all survivors, but you have to go through the layering of programming and the trauma memories to get to this sort of information. So this client had done this work, and here's what she describes alchemy as being like. These fragmented elements of human life force are currency in the spirit realm. Before a survivor or an alchemist can build in the spirit realm, they must have their building blocks all sorted out. So they either do warfare in the spirit realm and capture the elements they need, or they barter and they trade for them. So let's say an alchemist needs the element of fire. That they're lacking that particular element and characteristic of a human being for them to build something in the spirit realm. They may trade human souls that they've already collected and housed to get that element of fire. And what I mean by that, survivors are doing warfare all the time in the spirit realm, and they battle one another, and they'll literally capture human soul fragments and imprison them in pocket realms or domains and hold on to them to use that life force and essence for things like this, for alchemy. So they may draw that fire element from the bank they have of human souls and already collected. They may trade with other individuals, something like a high place. They may have a domain in the spirit realm that they've already conquered through battle and say, John, I'll trade you this high place that I own, and it's mine if you'll give me so much of the elemental of fire of human beings so I can build the project I'm trying to work on. They may have territories that belong to them, and they may be traded. They can even trade soul ties or open doors that they have to various individuals' lives to acquire that element of fire they need. So trading soul ties would look something like this. We'll call this client doing alchemy Jane. So let's say that she had had sex with John. So she has a soul tie with him. She owns a fragment. She is tethered to a fragment of John Brown because they became one in spirit. And so she finds another person that wants access to John Brown. And so she says, I'll give you an inroad into John and trade this soul tie. You can have it, and you can go wreak havoc in his life and bug him if you'll trade me the elementals of fire to do my project. This happens all the time. Ungodly soul ties need to be broken for that purpose. So once she's gotten all of the elements of the philosopher's stone, then the survivor goes to the space where they can create. I'm told this is kind of like a pocket realm, but not quite. It's one's protected territory, like a home base, the client said, in a video game. I know from working with other clients that this protected space is Petra. Everybody has Petra inside, a visual of that in their system, and they run to that place for safety, just like the Jews did. They like to copy scripture, and that's the safe place where alchemy and creating happens. So many people are, the client said, so many people are warring and stealing and messing with each other in the spirit realm. The survivor needs a private place to work and create. It's a creative space that's likened to the center of your territory inside. As the survivor creates, they're in a deep meditative state. They can cycle their own life force into the creation too, so they can put some of their own self into it. They're taught to cycle their energy, or as I said, pull from somebody else's soul that they've captured. The matter found in the elements is to construct and develop worlds in the spirit realm. God really did create us in his own image as a creator God, and he gave us the ability to build in the spirit realm. And I don't have time to go down that tangent, but in the book of James 1:15, where it talks about how strong desires and the process that leads to birthing death, birthing things in the spirit realm. So this principle is in scripture. It can be birthed for good things in the spirit realm or bad, the things we do here on earth. I'm told that the substance of the elements looks like small wisps of smoke coming off with tendrils. The story Rumpelstiltskin that we were told as children, where a maiden is forced to spin straw into gold, or her firstborn child would be taken away by the dwarf Rumpelstiltskin, that's really a story about alchemy, and clients really do have dwarfs, entities tethered to their system in Snow White, where they mine the gem parts, the energy that I talked about of the gem parts on the Sephiroth. But these stories of alchemy and stuff are hidden in the fairy tales. Just like they're using movies now to program children, they used stories back then. So the real gold is human life essence. You know, when that maiden is turning straw into gold, it's breaking the human beings down into the very elemental components is the gold. So this warring and conquering of one's fellow man is the place that the survivor is permitted to exert control and take out their wrath for all of the harm and the injustice that was done to them. But it is hidden from the host personality's conscious awareness behind dissociative walls. The severe trauma and lack of control of their own life and mind causes them to have a huge need to exert control and exert their will somewhere else. And it's done in the spirit realm using alchemy, witchcraft, conquering worlds, people, and entities. They're building things and destroying things in the spirit realm. And this meets a real need. It's the second hardest thing to get clients to give up, is that alchemy and witchcraft, building in the spirit realm. They have more invested in the spirit realm than they do here on earth. Like it's their escape. It's their place that it's so horrible in the body and on earth that all of their happiness, their life force, the majority is invested over there, and they're addicted to the power that comes from it. Again, this is their escape place, the spirit realm. It's where they feel safe and in charge. So in order to help a survivor recover new coping skills, helping them to find God's purpose for their life and helping them to let go of their life in the spirit realm over there and getting them to invest in relationships here in the earth realm is a huge part of the healing process. And please know, because I see this all the time in ministries that mean well, they'll do deliverance and have the clients let go of these entities and their coping mechanisms, but they don't replace them with new ones. And just know that that type of functioning can't be maintained over the long haul because the needs have to be met. And this is the only way they know. This has been set up this way since they were itty bitty. So let's not leave out the helping them to invest in this earth realm and what that looks like and how to get their needs met. I didn't make a special slide that just had this picture of the philosopher's stone in it with the red circle and the Ouroboros, which is a Leviathan, circling it. But this is what I want you to look at. So the small circle in the very center of the philosopher's stone represents the original child before programming. This is the intact child. And as that symbolic circle, they're going to go through 4 stages that are symbolized by color changes. They start out at black, which is like the black night of the soul, the dark night of the soul. Then they move into white, yellow, and red. Think of the creation of those colors as chemical changes happening on the level of matter in the being of the child. Again, this is not my belief. This is what alchemy says. This is, if you look at Carl Jung and some of the, going back to antiquity, people who adhere to the philosopher's stone and alchemy, this is their explanation. So these color changes that happen to the original child are associated with programming steps. I'm not going to get into what they are at the moment, but just think of the creation of the colors moving from through black, white, yellow, and red as chemical changes happening on the level of matter in the being of the child. All of you guys are familiar with the fact that we as human beings radiate colors. I don't believe that's just a new age phenomenon. I believe that we really do radiate certain colors spiritually that can be seen in the spirit realm. But New Agers have termed that those colors aura. So I don't know of another word to call it. I'm just going to call it aura. So since alchemy is a psychological process of dividing up the human, you don't physically see the colors of matter in the child changing during the programming process, but the individual doing alchemy in the spirit realm does, like the example I just gave you of Jane. And so I guess you could say that the programming traumas are changing the aura of the child. This is a really old picture that dates back to 1475 that represents the 4 stages that original child goes through. I don't want to get into great detail about each of the 4 stages, but what I do want you to realize is what the end result is. If you notice in that first carafe, jar, whatever you want to call it, you have a man and woman lying on top of each other. And that represents the masculine and the feminine energy that's in every human being. In the occult, when they work with masculine and feminine energy to do alchemy, they're not talking about a gender. They're talking about qualities that a human being has that have masculine and feminine traits. Just know that this process, this 4 stages, result in the division and the splitting of the masculine and the feminine. You see the white queen, she represents the feminine split of that original child, and the red and yellow king, he's going to be red, red king. In the other picture on the right, he is going to be that split off of her to be the red king. Let me tell you a little bit about what masculine and feminine qualities reside in those 2 split parts. Um, Our masculine characteristics is the strength and physical power in a human being. It's the action oriented, take action. Um, Strong desire is in that part of you. It's the instinctive primal part of you. It's called masculine energy. And then the feminine energy that's in every human being is like the passive, the receptive, where the masculine gives, the feminine part receives. And the feminine part, represented by the white queen, is creative energy, it's intuition, it's the spiritual side. So that's what they mean when they talk about masculine and feminine energy. And that's what happens in this 4-stage process. You end up with 2 parts known as the white queen and the red king. And these will be 2 parts in the system that do not adhere to the programming. They are 2 parts of the system that know it's a trick, that believe in God, that don't buy it, the whole programming scenario. And I want us to follow them and see what happens and how they're used to develop the rest of the system. Let's discuss what happens to the White Queen first. She's going to be used to run the whole system. She's going to build new worlds and different realms. She will do alchemy within the system and reproduce with fallen entities to produce hybrid children, which we'll talk about later, and a whole lot more. So that white queen part is going to split into 8 more parts that are going to be referred to as gems. You guys remember I explained that the gems were the circles or the sephirot on the Kabbalah tree. But before the gems are constructed into the Kabbalah tree, the queen builds the cube structure with them. These geometric shapes build one upon another to create the scaffolding of the Kabbalah tree. So the Kabbalah tree is the final result. And we're discussing stage by stage the building of that. So the White Queen splits off 8 new parts and she organizes them into a cube shape. Now, a cube is a 3D shape. It's 2 squares, right? It has 8 vertices. Each vertice of the cube signifies one of the queen's 8 splits. So this box or cube will later be associated with the flying house in the Wizard of Oz. It's the Merkaba, it's the spaceship that transports the parts and the White Queen who rides on top to different places in the cosmos. I'm going to show you some pictures of that in a little bit. Notice that the center of the hexagram shape here, that structure that we discussed earlier, is the shape of a cube. The center of that hexagram is a portal that that cube can go through. So the very center of the hexagram is another hexagram, and that serves as a portal, just like the center of the pentagram did, and that cube can go through that portal. So human parts are transported through the central portal of the hexagram to different planets in the cosmos. Remember, we discussed that earlier, how each point of that 6-pointed star signifies a human part that goes to the domain in the cosmos of a planet, and the assigned god to that planet is tethered to them. So this cube is known as the black cube of Saturn. Even the top of this, I'm going to show you that even the top of the planet Saturn has this hexagram shape that signifies the black cube. Let me show you guys that picture. So notice in this picture, I have the hexagram that's got the black cube in the center, but it's a honeycomb shape. There's the hexagram with the 6 points on the outside, but then there's another hexagram in the center that looks like a honeycomb that forms the 3D cube. On the very top of Saturn, you have that same honeycomb hexagon shape. So the cube, when it's worshipped all around the world, and you see statues and things of it. They're worshiping Saturn. In Greece, Saturn is called Cronus. In Egypt, the same entity was referred to as Geb. And in Mesopotamia, he's referred to as Enlil. So I just want you to know that this black cube goes back to antiquity for worship, and they're worshiping Saturn, and it's used in programming as well. Here's a few more pictures signifying the black cube of Saturn. Um, the black cube in Mecca, where the Muslim people um, go for pilgrimage and walk in circles for days around that black cube. That's Saturn. It's Saturn worship. At the top right, we have the cube phylacteries on the heads of the Orthodox Jews. There are statues of Saturn in Australia, Denmark, Manhattan, a whole lot of other places. I just put this one picture up of these huge black cube statues in cities around the world. And up here in the top left is a picture of the cubed rooms and houses in the movie Alice in Wonderland, the original movie. She falls through the tree roots and she falls into this cube house, a house made of cubes, which is programming. And it's also going to show you, so that's an earth program. I'm going to show you where the cube moves to an air elemental. In programming storylines, the cube is used in Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. It's the house that flies from Kansas into the air realm. It's an air elemental program. And so that house flies in the air and plops down in the colorful land of Oz. Notice that this is a map in the old books by Baum, who wrote it. And it shows that the map of Oz is a cube and it looks like an envelope. I'm going to show you a picture in the middle. That green area, the Emerald City, which is in the center, is where the queen sits. She is the ninth part that sits on top of the cube. And notice the two pillars here that just look like those Freemason pillars, the two front ones that would be Boaz and Jachin. And you got the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. Freemasonry right there. And lastly, I want to show you a cube that is in one of Lady Gaga's music videos. It's her music video called Born This Way. And there she sits. We're going to see how this programming happens in a little bit. But there she sits, chained into this box that goes flying through the universe in her video. And she reproduces in that video with fallen entities. She is the White Queen sitting on top of that box, flying in the house, whether the storyline's Dorothy or it's the storyline of Gaga in her video. This is the black cube of Saturn. You're going to see in a couple minutes why I'm taking the time to show you these different geometric shapes, because I'm actually going to read you some of the memory retrievals and the programming that children, my clients, went through to set these structures up in their system. I've literally, for the last several months, with many of my clients, been working on this box, praying for Jesus to bring the walls down and remove the parts that are stuck inside and minister to them, and then breaking the vows and stuff that tethered them to the entities in the box. So this is what it looks like for Lady Gaga, who represents the Queen of Heaven, the Queen of Heaven, which is the same as the White Queen part that we've been talking about. And notice that this cube actually looks like an envelope. It's like a package that is sent around to the different planets and places in the cosmos, delivering life force, delivering parts. And so that cube within the cube, we're going to learn about as a tesseract later. But just notice the little square in the center of that one is like the queen sitting on top of her cube, flying around, whether it's a cube or a house. And it's represented in Lady Gaga in her videos. It's represented in lots of places. I want to share with you one of my client accounts of the new birth experience that children like her go through during programming, but it's Lucifer's version. Instead of the new creation in Christ, the survivor becomes a new hybrid creation in Lucifer. So let me set you up for Amy's account. Why would a child be willing to go through such an experience? In order to prepare the child to have this Luciferian born again experience, the child is made to believe that they fell like Satan. I've termed it and dubbed it the hanging man experience. So they will have fell like Satan after they committed a bloody murderous act trying to save themselves. The child was pressed into protecting themselves or someone that they love. And then these days it's embellished to look like it's a bloody or worse murder than it actually is using virtual reality. And of course, the survivor, after they work through these memories, can see the trick of like, it wasn't as bad what I did as what they made me think I did. So the child goes through programming events that convince them that they can't be saved. They've been so abused, betrayed, and abandoned by their fellow man and who they believe to be God. They want nothing to do with either, and they're ready to renounce them and make vows that the programmer leads them into doing. And these vows need to be prayed over and broken during the deprogramming and the restoration process. The programmer will torment the child with phrases like, Christ does not come. He cannot help. You cannot be saved, but Lucifer can help you save yourself. And then the child is coached as to how they can save themselves from the very problem the programmer created. And this involves being conceived. They relive like a whole conception during the programming sessions. The child's conceived via their new fallen entity parents. Remember, the parents will have abandoned them, been killed. Somehow the child is left parentless. And the child ends up attaching to fallen entities. They attach to the Queen of Heaven and to Lucifer entities as their parent figure. And then they're birthed as hybrid species, a Nephilim, you might say. I don't understand how all of this works, but it is in all of the survivors. I don't know how Nimrod went from being a human and became a Nephilim, but there's some kind of process that does this. And all survivors have a part that they believe is a hybrid. And because it's not human and Christ only came to save humans, they are direly convinced that they can't be saved and it's hopeless for them. So, helping the client sever their attachment bond to the fallen entities who serve as their parents and convincing them that they can be saved is the toughest and the most critical work done with survivors. And just to help other ministries, I see well meaning ministries that'll come in and they'll help the client break these ties, but they don't replace it. They don't give the client the help they need to learn how to attach to other human beings and work through their fears of human relationship and forgive the betrayals and to bond to God. And if you don't replace those attachments, they're going to fail, right? You have to replace what you take away. So I want to go ahead and read my client's notes. One of the things that I have discovered over the years of working with clients is that if I can teach them the mapping of their system, we've talked a little bit about that today. What are the parts in the system? What are the different shapes and geometric shapes within their system? What parts are on them? What traumas happen there? What entities are they tethered to? The clients, once they learn that, they can deprogram themselves with the Lord. And this is exactly what my client Amy did. She didn't need me to do this. She and her prayer time with the Lord did the work that I'm about to read you. This is happening with lots of my clients, and we as a ministry have started doing group sessions, group deliverance, group ministry in preparation to try to teach us how to do it to the masses, where you teach on an element of programming and the group works together for deliverance. So the part that this client Amy describes is the born again serpent part of herself that developed into the serpent side of the worm. So remember I told you there's a part inside that thinks it's a worm, and one side is the serpent side that believes it's a god, and it's tethered in the air programming, and then the bottom flip side of that worm is the earth elemental that was buried and is the lowly worm, and you can flip that part like a program by flipping the program. So this born again serpent part of the system is the part that behaves as a god in the second heaven, doing alchemy in the counterfeit heaven realm. This really is an AI interface. It's a plug-in to AI B system technology and birthing through fallen entities to produce a new hybrid human 2.0. So here's my notes of Amy's account. She said, "There's a hybrid part of me. It was born again through the entities. This hybrid part is hard and angry. It's so difficult for me to bring this area into the presence of God." So she will take the dark places and invite Christ into the darkness to heal and help the parts. And she was really struggling with that. In prayer, the Lord took me to a cave. Everybody has this cave part inside, where the hybrid part was contained. There was a dividing wall there. I felt such resistance, pride, and rebellion. I did not want to yield to God in this space. And this part said, "Jesus, why don't you just leave us alone?" I shared the gospel with this part, and then Jesus walked up to it. He took the head of the snake and broke it. Remember that serpent on the Kabbalah tree picture I showed you? She said, "That surprised me when he did that. I expected Jesus to be gentle. I wasn't expecting that response from him." Then he removed my life essence from it. The portion of that thing that was removed was all distorted and deformed. The look of it reminded me of a molar pregnancy. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen a molar pregnancy on TV, but it's just like pieces of bone and teeth and hair all blobbed and deformed together. The serpent skin was the suit that housed this part of me. It was like a false covering. The Lord put that part of me into the river of life, and he then I saw the tree with bones buried at the root of the tree, dry bones at the tree roots, and I told them to live again. I died at that tree. And then I came back through the wormhole in the tree. There's a wormhole, a portal in the roots of the tree that'll take you to the underworld in Alice in Wonderland programming, and a near-death experience to the elemental of earth. When she says, "I died at that tree," some part of her went through a near-death experience where she's buried in the ground, and that's what she's talking about, that fragmented part of the mind that went through that trauma. So she said, "I died at that tree, and then I came back through the wormhole in the tree. I had an attachment to that serpent skin suit, a real bond. I need to break ties with the suit itself." See how Holy Spirit's leading her exactly of what she needs to do. That part died at the root of the tree, and a false birth happened. So much happened in that suit with my dark side family. And that suit that part wears is likened to the storyline in the movie The Incredibles. Remember, they'll show you movies and stories, and the parts inside think that they're just having an internal storyline, but those storylines cover the real alchemy and witchcraft and things they're doing inside. It's covered by a storyline. And that's the suit in the movie The Incredibles that's used. It's that serpent skin of that hybrid part that it puts on. Note that this part in its counterfeit born again experience, where it becomes a new creation or creature, it becomes a hybrid that feeds the survivor's belief that they can't be saved. Only humans can be saved. And so the person believes they're no longer human, therefore they can't be saved. By the way, the child died to save themselves because in their programming, Christ didn't come and they're led to believe when they were being hurt, he can't save you. They became their own savior. And the worm part again is buried in the earth, and then he rises, he astral projects into the element of air to be transformed into the flip side, the serpent god who resides in the second heaven. The worm and the serpent, heaven and hell programming, the new creation in Lucifer. It's the hybrid human 2.0. It's the super soldier. It's Hitler's Ubermensch. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip a detailed account about the worm. I want to focus more on the development of his system that begins with the hell line and develops into Alice in Wonderland programming, because Alice in Wonderland programming is up for survivors right now. I'm working with it, that programming in all of my clients. It's the development of the worm part know that the development of the worm part involves incest, being seeded with the father seed and fallen entity seed. And then that part is rejected by both and buried in the earth to become the lowly worm. I want you to notice that the hanging man that's upside down on this Kabbalah tree, he is the fallen lowly worm. That's a programming experience. And remember that, because I'm going to speak a little bit later about the falling feeling that results from this experience and what that means. The worm, as I said before, is the flip side of the serpent god part. You see the serpent at the top of the Kabbalah tree. It's the worm part that agreed to be experimented on in the lab. Every survivor will have an internalized white, it's all white, it's always white lab that's based on the external lab torturing and splitting of the mind they went through. And so that worm will have agreed, I will let you experiment on me in this lab if you can help me forget the horrors of the abuse and the betrayal. And so remember, they always have to engage the child's will. And so his will's like, yeah, you can experiment on me if it'll help me forget. And so the problem is solved in AI technology. And so frequencies are used to regulate emotions and emulate love and happiness to the child. And so that meets the need of the worm part. So that will have to be dealt with in programming. Once the client has fallen and they are convinced that they themselves cannot be saved, they're led by the programmer to believe that they must save their family member. So you obey on another level so they don't have to be damned and go to hell. And the salvation of the family members, or if you're just a child in preschool and your family is not programmed or generational Satanist, people in your preschool class that you have to save. And the child becomes the sole responsibility. Family member becomes the sole responsibility of the child. And this will lead to what we call the hell line programming. So the hell programming is you're damned, you're a hybrid, you can't be saved. And then building on the hell programming is what we call the hell line programming. It's going to computer interface. I've learned that if you find a rule that the survivor says they're not supposed to break, that if you ask them what happens if they break that rule, then you'll be informed about what happened during the programming process to teach them not to break that particular rule. And so that's what I did with this client. I asked her, I said, what happens if you step out of the hell line? And we're going to call this client Jane again. And she said, if I step out of the hell line, I'd have to face my own pride and revelry in evil. So that means there's going to be a lot of pain where she was set up to do something and forced and pushed into an act of evil, and actually enjoyed it because for the first time she felt in control and like she could master um, her own life with all the trauma. Um, and so she said, if I step out of the hell line, pride and control protect me from fear and shame. I'm too afraid if I lay down my pride and I humble myself before God, He'll still say that I'm damned and I can't be saved. I'd rather not know for sure if I'm truly damned than risk having to walk around knowing for certain that God's utterly rejected me. I just can't risk that. It's too painful. At least I have a decent life now. I don't want to lose what I have. When I step out of the hell line, I experience that awful falling feeling. I hate that falling feeling. Remember back in the slide when we talked about the hanging man and the falling from heaven like Satan. And so we're going to talk about that now. So I said to the client after she said that the awful falling feeling comes if I, and I said, we discussed the likelihood that the falling feeling is tied to sex with fallen entities and the creation of spirit children. Remember? And I'm just going to add, yes, this is your alien reproductive stuff. And the client said, if I'm honest with myself, that reproduction is alluring. It's addicting. I don't know how to stop. It's like crack, insanely great for like 5 minutes. And then you're left with the eternal consequences of your action. They introduce this to us as kids after the big hunts that last for days. You're filthy, exhausted, traumatized, and as betrayed and as rejected as it gets. Anything offered to you that feels amazing or good, you'll take. Every child takes it. No one rejects it. Eventually, you choose it so frequently, you get addicted to it. It's like an orgasm in your body, soul, and spirit. There's nothing like it. I can't quite explain it. Unfortunately, it is soul splitting. You literally feel parts of your soul being ripped from you. I don't know if it's your soul or your spirit being ripped, but that is the consequence of this sexual act with an entity. And that ripping feels terrible. She said, I hate that falling feeling. It's like a warning phase before the sex takes place. It's like a notice before you enter into this sin. It makes me think of a siren's call. It reminds you of what is coming. You will be in this horrible falling experience, and the falling will not stop until you yield to the sex with the entity. And then at that point, Jane hit a roadblock and she couldn't acquire any more information. So we did EMDR to help with that blockage. So I had her focus on the belief that she can't be saved. And I had her imagine stepping out of the hell line and see what came up. So through the EMDR, the client begins to see and recall some of the programming stuff and how the system operates. And she says, I have a part called Sarah Jane, and that part feeds my parts inside to this giant eye. And I want to take a minute to talk about the pictures here before we continue. everybody's going to have a part inside where you have like a winking eye or a closed eye. And I want to talk about the nature of that part. She'll be in the box. She'll be one of the early splits. Um, this picture, this little African American child down here, this is a different client, and her part's not called Sarah Jane. Her part's called Lily, but it's still the same characteristics of that Sarah Jane part. So this child part is going to be very loyal to that fallen entity mother. And she's going to view her as like a cyborg, right? Because remember, there's this um, demonically infused AI technology that becomes the attachment figure for the mother and the father. So sometimes it's referred to as like a cyborg mother. And the entity that is in that technology is the Queen of Heaven. It is Isis. It is Babylon, depending on, what culture you want to call her. So this child is portrayed with a winking eye. You'll literally, when that part comes up in a client, I have had this happen before, where the eye will start to glitch. It almost looks like a camera lens. It's kind of strange. And that's exactly what was happening here with Katy Perry. Some of you guys have seen the video on the YouTube and the internet of her in a concert, and she's trying to sing and her eye starts glitching just like my clients do, and she can't make it stop. It's like her eyes are operating separately, and she tries to play it off so nobody sees it and keep touching that eye to make it open up. Look it up if you haven't seen it. It's really strange, but this is what clients do when they're channeling that entity or that part. So this same part, with the eye inside, she has the winking closed eye because she gave her eye to the Queen of Heaven entity, so she herself wouldn't have to see the horrible things happening to Jane. She got demonic wisdom in return. This part is like a sorceress, and she betrayed the other parts inside the system so that she herself could be spared. And she's tied to Shrek programming. That's going to be a father trauma kind of program. And there'll be an internal swamp in the landscape inside, and that swamp is actually a portal. And the same part, Sarah Jane here with the eye, is tied to or associated with the yellow sapphire inside, one of the gems. And you do in deprogramming search out the gems and have the client put them back into themselves. The client continues saying, Sarah Jane feeds my parts to this giant eye. Sarah Jane turns into a snake looking thing and swallows me whole. Being swallowed up causes the giant eye to rise up in the back of the throat of that snake looking thing, and cosmic rays come off this giant eye. It has gravitational pull. The giant eye is an entity. The entity keeps me as a pet. I feed it. The energy from it keeps me in the hell line, and it keeps me from the real God. I see a snake mouth like in this picture. So she drew me a picture here to show me what the Sarah Jane part turned into, the serpent looking thing, and it swallowed her. And then up out of the back of her throat came this giant eye, like the Illuminati eye, the eye you see on the pyramid in the money, in our money. And then I'm going to show you a picture of the giant eye that she made me. But just because I want to show you that even though I'm using different clients to tell the story of programming, that this is across the board. These same kind of pictures, these same kinds of programming images and structures show up in clients. And I work with people from Moscow and Europe and Philippines and all across the United States. But this other picture here on the right is a separate person, and they showed me the worm that rises up, and notice the jagged teeth, and She drew these glowy red eyes. So the client created me this picture here of the eye. And if you notice, it looks just like the Freemason compass and the T square and the Illuminati eye in the middle. And that's what comes up in the throat of the part that turned into the serpent and swallowed her. And so she talked about being bonded to that eye. She says that it's my bond to the eye behind the snake. I'm so bonded to it. It keeps my feet locked in the desert sand of the hell line. I can't go to the real God because I belong to that thing, that eye entity. Your connection to this thing makes you a soothsayer. You also become like a salesman for him, to get others to go to him and proselytize him. And she's not the only one that has said that. Um, I looked up some of my old notes from when I was working with my daughter. And this picture here is a picture of that same Illuminati eye entity, she called it. And I find it interesting that both of them, without having collaborated, draw little feet on the bottom. My daughter drew it in the principality form, and the client Jane drew it as like a symbolic form inside. Of course, these high ranking principalities and things can change shapes, but just notice the similarities. I always find that amazing. Um, that pyramid is inside of that entity, the eye entity with the feet, and notice the jagged teeth like of the serpent that swallowed the part. So I think this is a good place to stop this portion of the teaching, and we'll just pick back up in the next hour teaching with more client accounts from our sessions that depict part splits and the development of the various programs.